how am I going to word this? Do you feel like the price point you may have put yourself at sort of kind of put the expectation like, hey, this is more than a team of two people? Not to say anything about obviously like how you value your game or anything like that, but a lot of say quote unquote indie games, I don't know if you know the conversion to American dollars, but usually, 14, 19, that's kind of like the realm where they sit at. So
Mhm.
I noticed a lot of kind of because I did some research in the reviews and stuff like that for the game, and a lot of people were just like, "Oh, at this price point, I expect X, Y, Z and stuff like that." And
Yeah, so I mean, pricing anything, games or not, is kind of a black art, I think, and that's kind of tricky. It's it's one of those things that we talked about with a lot of players throughout development, and it was really interesting last year at PAX, the first time we went. That was one of our questions, because it was earlier in development, and we were like, okay, with the content we've got right now, and this is people who hadn't played any of the campaign content, and they were just playing one of the sandbox modes, basically. And they're like, okay, what do you think? What would be the price point? And most of them came back and said, yeah, it's about the 14.99 or whatever it is US. And we were like, yep, that sounds about right for where we were at in development. And originally, we were hoping to get more funding and make it bigger, a bigger game, and that would have pushed the price point up a bit more. But pricing's hard. Like when we were talking to people at PAX this year, and saying, okay, this is what we're thinking in terms of the price point, because it was still before launch and we still could have changed it to be whatever. Most people that we talked to was like, yeah, that seems about right. And um, I think that there's also a lot of discussion, that we've had with other developers where people are like, be very, very careful about the race to the bottom in terms of pricing. Indie games have this in spades because they're like, oh, well, I'm making this platformer, and this other platformer sold at 14.99, so I'm going to make mine 13.99. Everyone will buy it. No, that's not really how pricing works. Um, but there's also a kind of odd thing that happens with that where if your starting point is $15 and the reality is most people buy stuff when it's the Steam sales, it's the summer sale or the winter sale or whatever. And if you start at 15 and you discount by 40% or whatever it is, you know plus then you take out Valve's cut and whatever else you're having to pay for, by the time you kind of get to the end of that, you're making like $2. And I've had a lot of developers caution us and say, look, don't undervalue your game because most of the units you shift will be in a sale, and you need to make sure that the value that you're providing actually comes out the other end of that, even with a discount. And I think that there's some really interesting discussions from a few developers who are like, players are really spoiled today, and you look at kind of the equivalent price point that we were paying. I say we because I do remember this, for games, 10, 20 years ago. And say, okay, well, if you added inflation and all the rest of it, what would you be paying for games today? And it's ridiculous. Like it's a really really high price point. And on the one hand, I think it's good. I think that people should be paying less because we don't have physical distribution as a mandatory thing anymore. And there's a lot of indie games where you're not having to pay for 1,000 people making a game. So there's sort of just sheer scale of economics there.
Mhm.
Uh, but on the other hand, I do think things like the mobile market in particular, where you've got lots of free games that are paid for by advertising or games that are $1, it means that a lot of players don't value games the same way. Like I kind of look at it as how much do you pay to go to the movies, right? I don't know what the average price ticket is in the States, but
oh God.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like,
all right, okay. So for people to actually go to the cinema and don't just Netflix it, what would you pay to go and see a movie?
at least, I mean, minimum like not
Just
matinee, like
just
just a
just
minimum.
just the ticket. Just the ticket, not none of the concessions and the rest of it,
Okay,
just
yeah.
the ticket.
Like $15 a person is pretty average.
Yeah.
Okay, so you pay $15 for essentially 2 hours of entertainment
Mhm.
on average, right? So I kind of use this as my mental benchmark and say, okay, if I'm quite happy to pay $15 to sit and watch a movie for 2 hours, what does that mean for a game that I'm going to play for at least 10 hours? Like what value am I getting out of that? And that's something which is interactive. It's something where I get to choose and have more influence. So you take that into consideration and you look at some of the games where people have sunk hundreds of hours into them and you're like, man, you are totally getting your money's
Mhm.
worth out of that $60 game or whatever it is, right? And it's been really interesting because this was a big factor for us talking about pricing for us and saying, okay, well, if we've got a campaign, uh, and it's a relatively short campaign, but the difficulty does ramp up and it does, go through all the mechanics and teach you how to do things. And then we've got a bunch of different sandbox modes and challenge modes, and you know, you can easily sink 10 hours into that
Mhm.
to have like a reasonable crack at just trying things out. Like let alone delving into really trying to build stuff. Like even just trying everything out, you could easily spend 10 hours
Mm.
easily. So we do kind of look at that and go, okay, well, you use your movie benchmark and say, well, this is about the value you're getting in terms of your time. And obviously, the market has a different opinion about uh, games should cost this much or that much. And there's we've had a couple of reviews definitely where they've said this doesn't feel like the right price point, and we do definitely take that into consideration and be like, yeah, uh, you might be right. Um, and I think that what that'll mean is when it comes around to the summer sale or the winter sale, and it's 40% off or 50% off or whatever percentage it is that we decide to throw at Steam for this, people will probably be happier with it. They'll look at it and say, okay, it's a $25 game, and I'm getting it for less than $20. This feels good.
Mhm.
This feels like a good deal or a good price point or what have you. Um, so it's hard. I think pricing anything is hard, and particularly games is a weird landscape for pricing.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but
It's like Dan and I both think that 60 for AAA games is way too low in
Mhm.
the current landscape of things.
absolutely, absolutely. Like some of those games, man. Like I look at them and it's like this is 60 is a bargain. Like you're kidding me. Like it should be at least 100.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I was
20.
actually I was gonna say that easy is I have that opinion of all kinds of stuff. I think we talked on the last podcast about like Final Fantasy VII remake, and I was like, if you
Yeah.
gave me like this for $120, happy, like I'm good, And I think indie games, like you said, they undervalue themselves a lot. They race to the bottom. You get these like
Yeah,
$10 experiences, and you're like, what are you doing, guy? You're losing a bunch of money. But people are spoiled, like you said, and they're trained for like 60, 15,
yeah.
a dollar, like depending on where it sits.
Indie's really hard in that respect because they're not business people by and large. Like it's that trope of the indie developer that goes and makes a game and then goes, right, I've made a game. How do I sell it?
Hmm.
And part of that is pricing.